Hi everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to decide what to grow in your garden. So sometimes we want to grow all the food, but we have certain restrictions or limitations that mean that we have to decide what are our priorities, which foods are we going to grow and which ones do we not have space, time, or resources for. Perhaps you have a really small backyard and you don't have access to, a quarter of an acre or half an acre that allows you to have this really big, large garden. Or maybe you have a really small budget for your garden this year and you need to pick and choose what plants to grow. Or perhaps you have a really busy job and you just don't have hours and hours every day to dedicate to a large garden plot. So if this is the case for you, how do you prioritize and decide what to grow and what not to grow? I'm going to present you guys today with sort of 9 areas to consider to help you decide what are the best crops and plants to grow for your family. So first and foremost, you need to take into consideration your growing zone. And so there's lots of resources online where you can just type in, the name of your city and your USDA growing zone. But this is really, really important to consider because there's no point in investing in seeds or plants for a crop that isn't going to survive and thrive in your area. Now remember, there are certain crops that you think you can't grow, but you just need the right variety. Sweet potatoes are an excellent example for this. So most people are surprised that my family and I, living in a zone 4, are able to grow sweet potatoes. And we absolutely can because we choose the right variety that thrives and grows in our area. So for us, that's Beauregard and Cavendish. And if you haven't already started your sweet potato slips and you need to check out a video, I'll post a link here so you can check that out. So take into consideration, if you live in a zone 3 and you dream of having a peach tree, it's probably not going to work out for you, but you'll be able to grow potatoes very, very well. So your first step is to figure out what is your growing zone, and that will narrow down your choices and help you decide what to grow. So this one may seem really obvious, but it's one that people overlook all the time. You should really grow what you eat. And I know that sounds, like I said, like a really simple concept, but it's very easy to fall down the rabbit hole of seed catalogs and walking into a nursery and suddenly coming out with all of these exotic foods that you've never actually tried before. So what I want you to do is for the next week, keep track. What does your family eat on a regular basis? What foods do we eat on a regular basis, right? Peppers, cucumbers, those are really good ones because those are your favorites, right? So we would definitely prioritize growing those. So make a list, that'll help narrow it down. And may I suggest that you try one thing that you've never eaten before, just one crop. So it doesn't take up too much space. For example, beets. They're really, really good for you, and maybe you've never tried them before. So why not plant a dozen or so? So a resource that I want you to use is the Environmental Working Group. Every single year, they come out with a list of what they call the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And they rank fruits and vegetables based on how much they're sprayed. That's a huge consideration on our homestead. If there's something that we can't grow, but it's not sprayed very much, then perhaps I will support a local farmer or just buy it conventionally from the grocery store. So things like spinach, kale, tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, think of crops that have a lot of water. They tend to be on that Dirty Dozen list. So are a lot of the fruits that you like, things like strawberries, raspberries, apples, right? They're all on that list. And if you have room to put in a small dwarf fruit tree in your property, why not? And then you can check out the Clean 15 list. This would be the list of fruits and vegetables that are sprayed the least. So these ones would maybe be lower on your list in your desire to grow. Another area to consider is taste. There are some things that just taste better if you grow them yourself. Nothing compares to a vine-ripened tomato, like fresh out of the garden in a salad, maybe on a hamburger, whatever you like to do. Tomato sandwiches are a big favorite around here. you're never going to get that same flavor and taste from produce in the grocery store because it's often picked when it's under-ripened. And so it can kind of ripen on the truck on the way over here. So take taste into consideration. So another thing I want you to consider is the price of the food that's available around you. There are some things that take up a lot of real estate in the garden, like carrots. But for us, even where we are and we don't have access to organic food all the time, buying a bag of organic carrots is never really that expensive. Can you think of some things that we grow that are actually really expensive to buy in the grocery store?
Probably all in the berry family, like strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, those kind of things.
They are very expensive. And so maybe instead of planting a whole row of carrots, you can decide to put in some raspberry canes instead. So I also want you to consider growing things that you don't really have easy access to. If you've got local farmers that offer CSAs or maybe fruit and vegetable stands that you can just swing by and pick things up, perhaps you don't need to grow pickling cucumbers. Perhaps you can find them from a farmer just down the road, ensuring that they aren't sprayed. Or maybe you can get a bushel from tomatoes, right? Like we have farmers right down the road, don't we?
Yeah.
We have a few.
We have the Amish.
Yeah, we actually live right in the middle of an Amish community. So anything that we can't grow or we can't grow in large enough quantities, we're very blessed to be able to head down the road and buy from them. So that's something I want you to consider as well. So the next thing that's going to help narrow down your choices, especially when you start looking at seed catalogs. If you've never grown food before, you're not even going to realize how many different varieties of tomatoes there are out there. Because when you go to the grocery store, you maybe have a handful of options. In a seed catalog, you have pages of options. So ask yourself, are you going to be making tomato sauce this year? Or do you want to grow tomatoes so you can have tomato sandwiches? There are two very different types of tomatoes that you would want to grow. So think about what kind of needs you have. I also want you to think about sourcing perennial vegetables. And I can post a link to some of the things that we grow in our garden up here, because perennial food sources will keep giving year after year after year. Also take into consideration whether you want to store some of your vegetables, right?
Yes.
Like last year we grew beets and carrots and parsnips and all kinds of root vegetables, but I didn't buy the right variety, so they didn't store very well. So if you're planning on storing some of these, make sure your seed varieties are specifically for storage vegetables. So perhaps you need to grow your food in your front yard. And maybe this might upset a few neighbors. This is when we want to take aesthetics into consideration. Maybe you'll need to grow foods that are really pretty. Things like eggplants have beautiful flowers. You can get some really nice ornamental kales and lettuces that almost look like you're trying to grow something beautiful, but you're actually growing food. And there's lots of edible flowers that you can grow too that provide beneficial companion planting benefits, but are also really pretty. Do you remember some of the pretty things we had in our garden last year?
Yeah, like marigolds, the M's.
Nasturtiums? Yeah.
Those are beautiful too.
They're really beautiful. They serve a purpose and they're all edible. So that way you can take into consideration the aesthetics of your garden. And last but not least, I really want you guys to have fun with this. Last year, I had a whole bunch of people messaging me panicking. They were worried about food shortages and all this kind of stuff. You're heading into gardening season with a sense of fear, a lot of pressure on yourselves. And you know what? If you try to focus on having fun, then it really takes that pressure off. And if you've got kids, there's actually some things that you can do to make gardening really fun, and that also helps to narrow down some of your choices in plants. What was one of your favorite things to do in the garden last year?
I really loved going into the teepees with all the plants. It was nice and dark. Grab a light and read a book.
That was true. We often caught him. We have a lot of teepee style plants that we grow, things like beans, peas, even tomatoes. If you get a vining variety, you can train them to grow up. And we would often find him underneath the teepees with a book reading. It was a really magical thing. Or maybe you want to dedicate a small portion of your yard to growing some pumpkins for Halloween. There's lots of ways that you can Yeah, there's lots of ways you can incorporate fun into your gardening. So I hope I've provided you with some guidelines and suggestions and ways that you can help narrow down your choices if that's something that you're faced with this year. Food varieties, the list from the environmental working group, growing what you actually eat. These are all things that seem really simple, but when you combine them together, it'll really help narrow down your choices. And that way you can make the best choices for your family and for your garden. If you've got any questions, comments, or if you have any suggestions to help people narrow down their options, please leave them below. And until next time, this is Correne from Spirea Herbs, wishing you health and wellness.
Bye.